What is the craziest thing you've witnessed in real life but no one believes you? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. Went camping in the Kalahari Transfrontier Park. On the Botswana side, we did a nature trail, which means a trail of 4 nights in the wild. No camps or fences. One morning we were having coffee before breaking down camp when we noticed lion prints around our tents. The one tent had marks in the dust which looked like the male was so close that his mane rubbed against the tent. As we were discussing this, I noticed movement in the grass behind our tent. As we all turned to look, a lioness sat up and stared at us, less than 100 m from us. As she turned to walk away, all around us, 4 male lions also appeared in the long grass. Turns out they were stalking us, a party of 5 people. And when the lioness realized their cover was blown, they just got up and walked away. It was scary. Their paw prints were the size of dinner plates. And we still had 2 nights on the trail. Needless to say, we didn't get much sleep. Story 2. I saw Mick Jagger driving a convertible with the license plate Jagger Summertime in Toronto several years ago. I was in the passing lane. He was in the middle lane. I did a double take, he noticed, smiled, and threw me the peace sign. Husband doesn't believe me. Story 3. Went outside around 9 p.m. one night in dark to walk home from my neighbor's house. I saw a huge black jungle cat about 20 feet away from me. I hustled inside. Find out the next day in the newspaper that the circus in town had a black panther escape the night before. Edit #1. I was about 9, 10 years old. My neighbor was my grandmother. The black jungle cat was in a hedgerow wood line about 20 feet away. I had nightmares and dreams about it for years, how scared I was. My parents didn't believe me when I told them until they saw it in the newspaper. I was scared to go outside at night for years after. Story 4. I saw a Tasmanian tiger in Australia. They've been extinct for many years. So did my next door neighbor in the Blue Mountains. It was dusk. He said, "Did you see it too? No one will believe us." And no one did. No longer live in Australia, but it's a wild place. Story 5. So this one is not violent or action-packed, just surreal. Back in the day, I had relatives who owned a funeral home. This one weekend, we were in town visiting other members of the family, and Dad gets up in the morning and says to me, "Let's go over to the funeral home and wash the car." They had a large garage attached for the hearses, cleaning them, etc. So we get to the funeral home. My relatives are there already. Open the garage doors and get ready to clean the car. That's when I notice the stretcher in the corner, so I ask, what's going on over there? My uncle says, "Oh, that's Mrs. Murphy. She passed late last night. We're at capacity right now, so as soon as there's space inside, we'll move her in." Okay, so, fair enough, these things happen. So we get the materials and start cleaning the car. Right about then, a Jeep pulls into the parking lot, which was odd because it was kind of early on a Sunday morning. This guy gets out, opens up the back, pulls out a unicycle and bowling pins. He proceeds to ride his unicycle around the parking lot, all the while juggling bowling pins. I watch this for a minute or two, turn to my father and say, "Doesn't it strike you a bit odd that we're cleaning the car in a garage with a dead body in the corner, while a guy on a unicycle is riding around the parking lot juggling bowling pins?" He stops, kind of pauses and says, "You know, it is a bit odd, isn't it?" I still think that was a rather large understatement. Story 6. I stroked a bird when I was a kid, about 6 or so, and it fluffed into my hand for a minute, and it's the most Disney princess thing that ever happened to me. We were on holiday in some camp, and it hopped onto a miniature rose bush, and I went up and we just hung out and vibed for a solid minute or so with the pets. My mom was the only one who saw it, but no one ever believed her either. Story 7. I grew up near a correctional facility, in the middle of a nowhere town, so street lamps were very far apart / we had one light off our porch. One night, my sister and I were outside, just sitting and chatting. We saw someone walk past with what appeared to be a jumpsuit on, light in color and reflective writing on the back. Within 5-10 minutes, a single cop drove down our street and searching the wooded areas with spotlights. Never anything on the news or anything communicated about an escaped prisoner, nor did the cop stop to chat or ask if we saw anything. Story 8. One year on our camping trip, my friends went to go on a beer run, approximately 45 away, while I took a nap in the tent. When I woke up, it was 4 or 5 hours later and almost completely dark. My friends had gotten lost. I would find out later. We had taken psychedelics that morning, so it was understandable. Anyways, I get out of the tent to join the group of families we go camping with around the fire, and I kind of see this huge, dark blob in front of me, but chose to ignore it, pretend I didn't see it. I was half convinced it was the psychedelics anyways. I take a few steps and then hear thud thud, and the ground shook a bit, so clearly the blob was real, alive, and absolutely massive. The fact that it was spooked at my sudden appearance and given where I was, figured it was probably a huge black bear. At this point, the best thing I could think to do, apparently, was to continue to pretend it was not there. So I went over to the fire and just stood there, keeping an eye on it. It then started to move closer to the fire, where there were about 30 people of all ages. No one sees the bear. It kept moving closer, so eventually I just said, hey everyone, unfortunately there is a bear right over there. No one believed me for about 5 seconds. Then I was just like, it's literally right there, and pandemonium ensued. Parents screaming, banging pots and pans, chaos. The bear ran away almost immediately, but yeah, it was very large. My friends got back and they also didn't believe me, LOL, until everyone else corroborated my story. Story 9. I grew up in the Pentecostal church. I saw exorcisms where the person would be crawling on the floor, growling and speaking in a demonic voice. I'm an atheist now, so I don't believe in demons anymore, so I think it was just people with mental health problems, and maybe some were faking. But a lot of people don't believe exorcisms still happen at all. At the time, I thought it was real, so it was pretty exciting. They tried to cast demons out of me too, but nothing happened. Boring. Story 10. My first job was as a nursing assistant in a very expensive nursing home. Most of the residents were wealthy. There was a lady there who was stick thin and only laid in bed or sat in the chair. She didn't do anything on her own. She was unable to speak and would only cry when I read her mail to her. Of note, she had the most amazing collection of the prettiest nightgowns I've ever seen. Pastel colors, light, flowy, multiple layers, just beautiful. Designers like Christian Dior, etc. One night, one of our residents died, and I was busy getting him ready for the funeral home to come get him. I walked into the hallway, and there she was, in her beautiful nightie, standing in the middle of the hallway. I ran to her and told her it was time for bed. I guided her back to her bed and got her all comfy and warm. She never tried to get out of bed before or since. No one believed me that I found her in the hallway. Story 11. I once watched a huge war between crows and seagulls just outside of my house. They were flying in a giant circular swell, which I've actually seen before, but they were clearly warring. There were calls for reinforcements, and a giant cloud of crows would come from far off. The seagulls were far less organized, but clearly rallying forces from the bay. They would fly really close behind the opposite birds and crowds, and force them to keep flying up until they got exhausted and landed on the road and parking lot across the street. There were multiple birds laying everywhere, dying or flapping around. Some of the crows were dive-bombing seagulls that tried to land. The gulls were less aggressive, but would sort of split the crows with their numbers and would ball up into a big group in the swell, and it had forced the crows to disperse. Also, it seemed like the crows had different factions and were a little feisty with each other sometimes too. It happened all within maybe 20 minutes. The sky also opened up like it does before a storm and seemed to end just as quickly, and all the birds gave up, and it seemed obvious the crows won because some hung around afterward to laugh in the parking lot. It felt like I just watched some epic war because so many birds came to this spot just to do this. Came inside, told my parents, and they shrugged it off like whatever. I tried to get them to come outside to see the dead bodies. They just didn't seem to care. Story 12. I had a crush on a coworker. I'd finally got brave and mentioned how much I liked her. Turns out she was into me too. We made plans for the following evening, and I went home feeling pretty happy. That night, I dreamed that I was driving to her house, and it was so very vivid. The next day, I picked her up from work, and she wanted to go to her house to change and get ready. I told her I dreamed about it, and she asked me to describe it. I did, and she was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Turns out I had just described the route to her house, along with landmarks, stands of trees, a railroad bridge, a Y in the road, including the layout of the interior of the house, where the driveway was, the row of 5 huge cedars along the road out front. I had never been there, and had never even driven down that road that I'm aware of before she directed me there. To this day, I have no explanation for it. To be clear, it wasn't exactly asterisk like the dream in reality, but it was close enough to be startling. I wish I had dreamed about how irredeemably awful the next 2 years would be because of her instead. Story 13. Seeing a Bigfoot. The difference is, I expect people to not believe me. Plus, I'm not dying on some hill proclaiming Bigfoot is real because at the end of the day, I didn't get out of my truck and examine him, confirming it was a Bigfoot and not some jerk-off in a Bigfoot suit. However, if what I saw was a man dressed up as a Bigfoot, then he was legitimately well over 7 feet tall and extremely jacked, and his suit was more Hollywood authentic than anything I've ever seen on screen. Story 14. When I was in HS, I was in an early college program that meant I also had the chance to take college classes as well. One day I was just killing time in between classes at the library. This stranger college girl I've never met or talked to before just approaches me out of nowhere and just sits on my lap. Me, being a virgin teen male, I don't know what to say or how to react, but I wasn't pushing her away. We end up kissing and groping, and it's wild, because we're in a public library that just wasn't busy. I think we were the only people in there. Then out of nowhere, she just gets up and tells me to follow her to her car. I'm both excited and spooked, but oddly, when I got outside and saw her, she acted like nothing just happened and just ignored me. I honestly thought I dreamed this, but I distinctly remember being on the computer buying Minecraft for Xbox while I was on the internet at the library that day, and looking back, the dates line up. It wasn't the first time I kissed a girl, but it was the first time I felt a girl up as much as I wanted to. I felt obligated to tell my friends because we sit at those computers all the time, but they didn't believe me. Story 15. Saw half of a coworker's face get ripped off by the teeth of a patient in a psych ward. Everyone is always quick to ask about my experiences working a state psych hospital, but is just as quick to call me dramatic or a liar. I refuse to discuss my work with anyone who has never been in my field due to it. Story 16. Long story short, I met a very strange guy while playing football when I was 10. 15 years later at uni, I was walking around and the same guy shows up. I recognized him immediately, but he didn't seem to recognize me. 2 days later, I traveled to another city with my girlfriend. We are walking around in a park, and I see two men French kissing. One of them was the weird guy. 3 days later, my vacations start, and I travel with my family to a city on the beach, thousands of kilometers away. At night, my cousin takes me to a club. We start dancing, and at some point, I go out to grab some air. The moment I'm going out the door, the same guy is walking in. Our eyes met for a moment. Again, he didn't recognize me. I called my girlfriend, and she thought I was going crazy. I never saw him again after that. Story 17. I swear this happened. I used to get out of work at 3 a.m. I went to bed around 4:30. Around 5 a.m., I hear this noise that sounds like Darth Vader hyperventilating. I tried to go back to bed, but it continued, so I finally got up to look out my window. Across the street was a hot air balloon that looked like it had crashed onto my neighbor's roof. The basket was caught on the chimney, and there were two guys running around on my neighbor's roof trying to get it unstuck. As I watched, they got it free, hopped in the basket, and floated away. I went back to bed, and when I woke up, I told my brothers and parents what I saw. They absolutely did not believe me. There was slight damage to neighbor's roof right near chimney, but when I asked them about it, they said a storm the previous week had caused it, and they hadn't had a chance to fix it yet. No one I ever spoke to on my street said they saw it or heard anything about it. I'm apparently the only person that saw it. I swear this happened, but can't understand how no one else saw/heard it. Story 18. My friend and I were driving down to Atlantic City for the weekend on the New Jersey Parkway. I was in the passenger seat. A beat-up old pickup truck pulls into the highway next to us. I'm looking out my window at the driver of the truck, and it's Mickey Rourke. I turn to my friend and say, "Is that Mickey Rourke?" He turns and looks out my window and confirms that he too sees Mickey Rourke. Mickey Rourke then nods at us and drives away, never to be seen by out-mortal eyes again. Story 19. Witnessed by me, my father, my brother, and sister. At breakfast one morning, we watched a years-old store-bought porcelain mug, glazed with no flaws, cracks, or irregularities, get filled with hot water, a tea bag, milk. The tea rapidly sank away and disappeared. The cup was refilled, and again the fluid drained away. A third time, the fluid dropped an inch and stayed. There was no fluid on the mug exterior or on the table where it sat. We continued to use the mug for years, and it never happened again. The mug eventually was dropped and broken. I examined it. It was solid white, unstained porcelain. I have no explanation. Story 20. In the early 1980s in upstate New York, while I was attending college, I was walking in the woods just exploring. I had a hobby where I found abandoned homes and played amateur archaeologist by digging up things. Some of the bottles I found I sold for $50 or more each. Anyway, in the woods, I saw a huge bear that was north of 400 pounds. While quietly walking away backwards, 3 large Mastiff-type dogs attacked the bear and tore him apart like he was cardboard. There was no man who seemed to own the dogs nearby. When I returned the next day with my friends to start digging up the foundation of an old farmhouse, there was no evidence. Nothing was there. No blood, body, fur, or even disturbed plants. My friends never believed me and thought I was BSing them. Story 21. I was stocking the shelves at a big box hardware store when something fell on my back. I turned, and a monkey crawled from on my back, around to my face, and started trying to pull my facial piercings out. A minute or so later, a woman came around the corner and apologized and began trying to pry him off me. Story 22. Living in Providence while in school, was driving to a Dunkin' Donuts on Smith's 8 in the winter. As I'm approaching, I see this guy without a shirt on. What's more is his jeans are so low his ass is hanging out. I'm waiting to pull in when I see him stop in front of the drive-through exit, turn his head to the driver, do a 90-degree jump turn, drop his pants fully, grab his dick, and start swinging it around in front of the woman in the car. I pull into the lot and go in. Only me and the drive-through worker saw what the hell just happened. Then he walks in, pants up and ass out, walks to the front of the line, orders a coffee, and says he'll be back in like an hour to get it, and he just left. I told this story to my roommates when I got back, and they did not believe me. Story 23, this is just one out of many. When I was younger, my mom was switching our rooms, so my mom's closet was full of furniture. My cousin had come over and we were playing around. I saw a girl with a ponytail run into my parents' room, so I thought she was hiding from me. I went into my mom's room and heard moving and laughing in the closet. I thought my cousin was hiding in there and told her I wasn't going to bother looking for her, so I walked out. Also, I was shocked she was even able to hide in the closet because of all the furniture in there. Anyways, I decided to go downstairs because I didn't feel like playing and saw her in the backyard tossing a ball with my little sister. I had to sit down and process it for a bit because I thought I was actually going crazy. Story 24. My first cat, who I was very close with, roamed our home for years after his death. Corner of the eye stuff, never in full sight, but I could sense him and actually feel him press against me. One time I almost stumbled over him at the top of the stairs, the cheeky ghost cat. I love him. Story 25. I am incredibly absent-minded, and I was probably high also, and when I was a teenager, I walked to a payphone and 3 guys in a car were eyeballing one guy by the building. I made a call and walked back home and heard firecrackers when I was little, ways around the corner, or what I assumed was firecrackers. A little while later, I walked back to the payphone, lost in my own thoughts, and made a call to my sister. I was talking to her, looked down and was standing in some sort of powder. Looked up and there was a big new blood splat on the building behind the payphone. Looked out into the parking lot and there was a single bloody boot print leading to an ambulance with its lights off, and a bunch of older model brownish-looking cars that were kind of haphazardly parked in the parking lot. No lights, no activity, no people outside of cars, and no one cared that I was apparently in the middle of a crime scene. The powder must have been what they soaked blood up with. I spent my few money buying newspapers that week to see if there was any news about it, but I didn't see anything about it, and no one seems to believe me. Story 26. Having dreams of real places and locations in which I had no former knowledge, only to Google it upon waking and being able to fact-check that what I saw was real. As one example, I barely knew Guatemala was a country. I'm from Norway. In a dream, I was flying over Guatemala, just intuitively knew telepathically. I saw lots of mountains and volcanoes. Upon waking, I Googled it, and all geographical first-hand witness accounts of my sightings could be confirmed. I also saw a river in Turkey and asked an academic for help to find the river I saw in the dream. He found it all right. Told me the river I'm talking about dried out over 1,000 years ago. Out of all of these, I exclude dreams where I might have caught info on it subconsciously somewhere, which some people propose as an answer to this phenomenon. I never told family or friends. Kinda hesitate to tell people on the internet because people will just assume I'm making it up, as I can't actually prove I didn't have any knowledge beforehand. Story 27. When I was like 10, I was at a safari park with my family and we sat down for a picnic. I was asked to throw the rubbish in a bin, and when I opened the bin, there was a dead monkey inside. It had flies in its eye sockets. I told my dad and he didn't believe me, so my mom made him go and check. He jumped back like a meter. Story 28. When I was in middle school, we were on a school trip. We went to some theater to watch a play. That wasn't memorable at all. But after the play, we were all on the bus waiting to depart back to school. This old lady with a walker was walking by this kid playing a guitar outside of the theater. Somehow her dress just fell straight off. There she was, this 90-plus-year-old lady was standing there in her bra and panties. Our whole school bus erupted in laughter. The kid playing the guitar helped her out and she went on her way. I have that memory so vivid in my head. Always have. When Justin Bieber started getting popular, I yelled out, "That's the friggin' guitar kid," pointing at my screen like the Leo meme. This happened in the late 90s/early 2000s. I don't remember exactly. At the Stratford Music Festival. Story 29. I was in Kotor, Montenegro with my husband. There's a walk you can do up to see the city from above. Normally people do this walk during the day, but we heard if you go at night you don't need to pay, and it's a way to beat the crowds. So we're there at 8 or 9 p.m. doing this big walk up the mountain, and it's steep and dark and tiring, and we need to use our phone flashlights to see. At this point we're seeing a lot of spiders like huntsman spiders, which freaks me out, but that was nothing compared to what happens next. On the brick wall, as we're closer to the top, I see this crab-looking thing, honestly like 40 centimeters or so, walking across the wall. It's green or brown and looks like a creature from the deep depths of the ocean or from Stranger Things. It looks like a giant crab you see at the aquarium. I flipped out when I saw this thing because it was moving and ran for my life. I was having heart palpitations. I was so scared. My husband ran after me and was calming me down as we ran away. He saw it too. When we got to the bottom, we were both flabbergasted. The next day, we asked our Airbnb lady Elena about it, and she had no idea what we were talking about. Not taking a photo of that thing is my greatest life regret to this today because I would have probably ended up on the news, could have discovered a new species or something. I can still see it in my head, this alien thing. And I'm thankful that my husband saw it exactly as I did, and I'm not crazy. Story 30. A washed-up slumlord, failed businessman, and glorified television star that inherited all of his money and hasn't earned any additional worth from his own business ventures, runs for presidency without any qualifications, and the people vote him in overlooking his blatant sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, and unethical practices. Story 31. I was out on a walk with my dog one late night in June 2016. I was still living with my parents, so it was before the Cubs won the World Series. We were on a bike path that was maybe 100 feet above a creek and came around a corner to find this absolute monster in the middle of the path, hissing at my dog. It was a massive snapping turtle that somehow climbed up the hill and now was just resting in the middle of the path. It looked at us, my dog went to sniff it, and it snapped back, and we left it to be on its own. On our return trip, it has made its way to the other side of the path and was slowly going into some yard. Story 32. I saw a UFO when I was a kid. I was on the beach, laying on one of those wooden beach lounge things they leave on the beach and put cushions on for guests. It was maybe midnight. I was just staring at the stars, listening to the waves, and I saw a bright light in the night sky. It moved all the way from out over the ocean, passing over where I was, and then disappeared over the horizon the other way. And most importantly, it would stop from time to time. It was not a plane, and I have since seen the ISS and satellites. It was not either of those things because, as you know, they don't stop. Whatever I saw, nobody else on the beach saw it that night. Story 33. Saw a UFO. Early 70s, 3 of us on midnight shift took a break and went up on the roof of a 5-story building to have a look around. Clear night, far away from any light pollution. We all saw it. It was silent, so nothing to hear. Larry, a nom-vet, totally freaked, saying no, 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 ran back in and to this day refuses to discuss it. Jim and I agreed on what we saw, but he was very uncomfortable talking about it. Told me if I told anyone he wouldn't corroborate. But I know what I saw. Story 34. Met and had a pretty friendly conversation with Taylor Swift at the hangar where her Falcon was sitting. I was ferrying a plane from Van Nuys that was in the same hangar. Left the conversation thinking that she was actually really down to earth and how that was probably something that wouldn't happen again. Fast forward about another 6 months and I see her again at the same airport in almost the exact same situation. We met eyes from across the room and I didn't think for a second she would remember talking to me. I wasn't going to bother her or anything, but then she smiles a big smile, waves at me, and calls out to me with my first name. I was stunned. No one believes me about either occasion. Story 35. It was senior ditch day and I was running late because I'd had to jumpstart my car. A bunch of us were meeting at the local park for a picnic and a day of soccer, capture the flag, and lawn games. I was late enough that all the morning traffic was over, and the streets were pretty empty until the lunch hour. As I was turning onto the same street as the park, a toddler, naked except for a diaper, rounded the corner out of the adjacent housing tract and onto the sidewalk along the street I was driving. Completely alone, no adult in sight, just waddling along. I pulled over just past him and pulled over, watching my mirrors for any sign of a parent. Just as I opened my door to get out and stop the kid, a massive dog, I've looked it up since, and I think it was either a Leonberger or St. Bernard, comes pelting around the corner pretty fast for such a big thing. At first I was panicking, thinking it was going to maul the kid, but then the kid turned around, pointed at it, and babbled like it was talking to the dog, who got ahead of the kid and stopped it from continuing down the sidewalk. After arguing with the dog for a short moment, the kid climbed up on the dog's back like it was riding a damn horse, and the two went slowly but surely back the way they'd come. I was flabbergasted. I realized now I should have gotten out of the car and made sure they made it back to an adult and warned the adult that the baby had gotten as far as the main thoroughfare. But I was a teenager, and honestly I wasn't sure I'd actually seen it. I just sat in my car for a moment going, what the did I just witness? And then remembered my car was running and I needed to get to the park. A few of my friends did believe me, but not a single adult I told did. So I stopped telling the story. Story 36. On a road trip with my family and saw a bunch of buffalo roaming around. Us and a bunch of other cars stopped, got out, and took photos. This one bison stood right in front of us and we kept trying to take pictures, but it wasn't showing up on film. All the other bison, background, etc. all showed in the film expect that bison. Story 37. Saw a guy dressed as a postman, who I assume just robbed a bank, walking past the main postal office and police station. Cop car screeches up in front of him. He pulls out a shotgun and starts waving it around. More police pile out of the police station. There's a brief standoff and he throws the gun down. Nothing on the local news or in the paper. No one where I worked just across from it all believed me. Story 38. When I was a small child, I lost a tooth and was taking it over to show my parents when I dropped it on the carpeted floor. I knew exactly where it fell and looked everywhere around there. There was nothing it could have rolled under, and I didn't fling it or hit it on the way down. I literally watched it fall, but then I blinked and it disappeared. Totally gone. Then several months later, I was walking past that same spot and my lost tooth was just sitting on the floor exactly where it should have been. Nobody believed me. I think that tooth time traveled. Story 39. My wife, another couple, and I were driving through the flat plains of West Texas when the road took a weird dip into a small valley about 50, 60 feet deep. At the bottom of that dip on the side of the road, we saw 3 dead black and white cows that were so bloated that they were almost perfect spheres with heads, 4 hooves, and a tail sticking out. It looked like something straight out of The Far Side. We wanted to stop and take a picture because it was so funny that we were all laughing out loud. But before we even rolled down a window, the smell became so horrible that we just wanted to get away from the beach ball cows as fast as possible. I regret not toughing it out to this day, because everyone we tell about it kind of rolls their eyes, clearly thinking we're exaggerating how nearly perfectly round they were. Like, even the bottoms where they touched the ground was barely flattened out at all. It was like someone made a comical bowling ball cow sculpture and left it in the one valley, along an otherwise flat, remote farm road. We still laugh about it together, knowing that if you didn't see it, you'd never believe how impossibly perfectly round they were. Story 40. I was at a public pool next to a pond in a suburb near Houston, Texas. During the safety breaks, hourly 10-minute swim breaks, all the kids go to feed the fish in the pond. I'm looking in the water and see this thing with 4 webbed feet and a duck bill and weird-looking beaver tail swimming near the top, then slowly dive back down deeper. I swear to God I saw a fucking platypus in Texas. The pond is part of a larger water system that goes through forests. Maybe some rich weirdo bought one, then let it go in the water system, IDK. Story 41. When I was student attending an away school with a dorm, the dormitory in school would often punish me for the hell of it. I would often be harshly, severely punished. I was often be placed into solitary confinement from weeks to months at a time. I was once punished for breaking something when I was out of state at a sports meet. The punishments ranged from that to having me take school classes by myself in a separate room because they wanted to keep on me. I left there in handcuffs because I beat up the guy who attempted to rape my girlfriend at the time. I kid you not, the school superintendent and principal said that she must have wanted it since she did not fight back harder, which even as a teenager I knew was bullshit. I have many old friends who can bear witness, but when people hear about the school, they often just can't believe it. Story 42. I'd like to say it was a UFO or UAP. It was 2013/2014, and I was hanging out with some friends past midnight. I watched 3 lights floating through the sky from different directions intersect, hold for like 2 seconds, then only 2 floated away. The 2 that left the meeting also left in directions that none of them should have, according to their previous trajectories. Also, the lights were constant, no blinking or changing in size, and were just white dots. Real weird, and I haven't found an explanation. Story 43. Seeing a fleet of orange orbs, like over 50 of them, going all sorts of directions at speeds I've never seen anything fly like. This was over 10 years ago. I called my kids out to see and then called my husband at work. When I called his boss, said, "Is this about the orange lights in the sky?" I said yes. Her husband saw them a few nights before in another city. Yet she refused to believe him, and my husband refused to believe us. Very frustrating. Story 44. 10 years ago, at about 1 in the morning, I was walking home from a friend's house. I took the shortcut through an old country pub that was in the middle of farmers' fields. Before I got to the pub, a black plane with no lights, looked like a military transport plane, flew over me. It was probably about 100 feet up. The plane was completely silent. I stood and watched it fly into the distance until I couldn't see it anymore. I was sober and accustomed to staying up until ridiculous hours, so I actually have no idea what it was. Story 45. I found out my stalker was someone I knew, and now I'm taking him to court. For 4 years, I was stalked by an anonymous man who tormented me with explicit messages, threats, and disturbing phone calls. He told me he could show up at my open houses, take what he wanted, and that I had no control. I reported it multiple times, but nothing was ever done. Then, in late 2024, I met a business professional through work. He was friendly, charming, and even flirted with me, but something felt off. When I looked into him, I discovered he was a registered offender with a violent past. That's when everything clicked. His messages, his behavior, it all matched my stalker. I realized that the man who had been tormenting me for years had been right in front of me. When I went to the authorities, they ignored me. But when I spoke out about my experience without even naming him, he filed a restraining order against me. Tomorrow we go to court. I've submitted my evidence, including my police reports and undeniable similarities between his messages and my stalker's. I know I'm going to win. And once I do, I'll finally be free to speak about this the way I should have been able to all along. Story 46. Very beginning of freshman year of college, was in a dorm lounge watching some people toss around a football. Guy was looking over his shoulder, caught it, and ran full speed head first into a big light pole. I just thought, I've been on this campus 3 days and I just watched a guy die. Ran downstairs. He was fine. Story 47. Saw a car legitimately poof into existence and flip and land on its top. Had to help the girl out of it. This car was not there. It was NY, nor there. Unless it came from damn space, I have no idea. Maybe it went too fast for my mind to register, but if it had, that girl would have been dead as hell. She was just scared and scratched up. Story 48. I live in DC and we have those 24-hour tire repair shops. This specific one has like a drive-through, so cars are forced to park on the road and they slowly move their way inside as the cars in front get finished. If you live in DC, this is on Florida Ave by Union Market. The road has 3 lanes in this direction, so the cars stay in the far right lane and people move around. This particular day, a 3-car hauler-type truck has unloaded a car and was parked on the street with the tire wheel guards down. A Wrangler was in the right lane and not paying attention and drove right up into the back of the truck. Just like in the movies, they weren't going super fast, maybe 25 to 30 miles per hour, but no one believes me. Story 49. We were driving along the highway and were deciding to keep going along it to get back into town or take the Ghost Road, a shortcut through the forestry to get there quicker. The road has been done up since then to make it wider, but back then it was still windy and narrow. Cars liked to speed through there and cut the corners. Plus, there were reports of kangaroos jumping across the roads, but I had never seen any. Initially, we decided not to go down the Ghost Road, but something was telling me we should. It was this feeling in my gut that wouldn't go away as we got closer to the turn. Turning down it, we kept traveling for a bit before I saw something white up ahead. After slowing down, it disappears and returns. It's this massive Dane X Irish wolfhound just running alongside the road, tail wagging. We pull over and get it to come over where we see it has a power cord wrapped around the neck so tightly we couldn't get it off. It's also cut up around its legs pretty badly, with some scabs on the backs of the arms. We get this dog we nicknamed Ghost because of the road we found him on in the white fur and took it home to document and cut the power cord off its neck. After that, we took it to the vet, got told the rightful owner had 3 days to return and collect the dog by law. Otherwise, he would be put in the pound for adoption. Thankfully, the owner didn't come forth. Chase was put up for adoption and found a home on a farm with other dogs and horses last time I heard. I think about that cutie quite often. I've never seen an abandoned animal down that road before or after the incident. It was just so strange how it all happened. Also, it was discovered by other witnesses that the owners had been having a fight in a nearby town over money where Chase was discovered tied up to the back of a ute with the same power cord. Either it was that he was dumped on Ghost Road to die because he was too big or he fell off after not being tied up properly. It's just so odd, because when you tell someone that you found a massive white dog on a road called the Ghost Road with a power cord for a collar that has just disappeared from all records since being found, it sounds a little far-fetched. Story 50. One night before my shift, I was working night shift. I took a nap before work around 7 p.m. on the couch. I was only asleep for maybe 20 minutes, but had what I swear was an out-of-body experience. In this state, I was at the bottom of my basement stairs trying to crawl up and trying to speak, but I couldn't do either. I was almost in a vegetable state. It was like I was trying to crawl back to my body on the couch where I was upstairs. Everything in this state, or dream, whatever you want to call it, was exactly the same in present time. I could see my wife in the kitchen and everything. It was crazy. The whole thing was so vivid and I can still remember it all to a T. Story 51. My father chased my mother through the house with a weed whacker. My father was a Chicago cop. He never swore, usually calm unless he wanted to beat me. I don't know what happened, but my younger siblings called me begging me to come get them. My father was in his SUV with several cops around. Suddenly, he pulled down his trousers and underwear and mooned all of them. I've always volunteered in my community since middle school. In HS, a group of us went to the children's hospital. I met a 9-year-old with burns over a large percentage of her body. Her father tucked her in bed, making sure the top sheet was snug, poured rubbing alcohol on the bedding, and set it on fire to punish her because the thought her mother was cheating. My grandmother's husband was an alcoholic and raged all the time. He had 6 kids, of which 2 were twins. In a fit of rage, he beat one of the twins so badly that she was blinded. On our 8th grade class trip, I mistakenly opened the wrong door and saw my teacher and school principal smoking weed. I opened the wrong door at a hotel where our company was hosting a gala. I saw our president having with one of our clients. She wasn't married, but he was. Went to the restroom during the middle of church service and saw the ushers pocketing the cash donations. I knew a guy in college that claimed to be a minister. The only thing was, all the members were women, and he had with all of them requiring them to get abortions. All of them had at least one. However, he felt they deserved to be punished for premarital, so he would only pay for the procedure and not the pain meds or transportation to and from the location where it was performed. It was beyond disgusting, and those women acted like it was completely sane. Story 52. I was at my grandma's late at night during COVID, and she has this 10-foot tall gate with spikes at the top, so no one can climb over. About 12:30 a.m., a car pulls into her driveway, and a guy in a hoodie gets out of the passenger, run up and jumps over the 10-foot tall gate doing a 360 as he jumps. He then runs into my backyard for about 30 seconds, but I don't know what he did back there. After that, he jumps back over the 10-foot gate, gets back into the car, and drives off. That night made me believe that there must be people with strange abilities in this world that no one knows about, talks about, or probably have ever seen. They exist, and they're out there. Story 53. Both me and my partner saw what could only be described as a gremlin sea monster one day. We went down to the beach one day. It was getting into the evening time. The other humans started disappearing. I saw what I thought was a small dog at first by some rocks. Then the Labrador saw it. She went over to say hello, ran away yelping. By the time my partner saw it, it had started to change shape and get bigger. Then the bats all flew out from this hole in the wall. The Labrador pulled us off the beach. Story 54. Ball lightning. I'm not sure I even believe it myself because it didn't quite match the descriptions of ball lightning I've read about, but I don't know how else to describe it. My dad was driving me home from something or other, and a thunderstorm had rolled in. We got stuck at a stoplight on a bridge over a highway, and I was looking over at the cars on the highway below. There was a flash of light and an absolutely deafening crack that made the car lurch. It looked like lightning struck the metal part of the bridge barrier, and then for like 2 seconds, a ball of shifting, sparking plasma hovered over the barrier before going out like a light. It literally looked like one of those plasma ball novelty items, but cranked up to 11. It didn't move, it didn't linger for long at all, it just hovered and snuffed out almost as quickly as it had appeared. The fact that it didn't behave like ball lightning is typically described makes me wonder if my child brain just misinterpreted the whole thing. Maybe my shock made time slow down, so I interpreted the actual lightning strike as lasting longer than it did. Maybe I saw something perfectly normal, but my brain amplified the moment because of how scary the other sensory input was. Honestly, I can't make much sense of it at all.